Billionaire sees his ex at a gala, but his reaction to a secret he never imagined shocks everyone. Leave a like and subscribe to support our channel. The air in the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria buzzed with the clink of champagne flutes and the rustle of silk gowns. A symphony of wealth and ambition swirling around Lana Brooks like a velvet fog. She stood near the edge of the room, her fingers tracing the spine of an imaginary book, a nervous habit from years spent curating shelves at her Boston bookstore. Tonight, though, she wasn't surrounded by the musty comfort of paper and ink. She was here, impossibly here, at a gala for children's education, a guest of her boss, Margaret, who'd insisted she come. "You need a night out, Lana," Margaret had said, her voice sharp as a freshly printed page. "Besides, who knows who you'll meet?" Lana smoothed the borrowed emerald dress over her hips, the fabric shimmering like a dragonfly's wing under the chandelier's golden glow. She felt out of place among the glittering crowd, their laughter a high-pitched hum that grated against her ears. Her life was quieter, days spent with her 6-year-old son, Caleb, whose giggles were her compass, and nights lost in novels where love didn't leave scars. She scanned the room, her hazel eyes catching on a figure across the sea of tuxedos, tall, broad-shouldered, with hair the color of midnight ink and a jawline that could cut glass. Her breath hitched, a sour tang of memory flooding her tongue. Grayson Blake. 7 years ago he'd been her everything, a whirlwind romance that tasted of espresso and rain-soaked kisses, his tech startup dreams a melody she'd hummed along to. Then, one morning, he was gone. No note, no call, just an empty apartment and a heart shredded like a discarded manuscript. She'd rebuilt herself page by page for Caleb. But now, here he was, the billionaire king of cybersecurity, his name whispered in boardrooms and tabloids alike. His eyes, those piercing grey storms, locked onto hers and the room tilted. The scent of his old cologne, cedar and smoke, rushing back as if he'd never left. "Lana!" His voice sliced through the din, deep and resonant, a cello string plucked in a silent hall. He crossed the room in long, predatory strides, the crowd parting like water before a ship. Up close, he was more vivid than her memories, his suit a tailored shadow, his presence a heat that licked at her skin. "What are you doing here?" She swallowed, the bitter bite of betrayal warring with the honeyed pull of his gaze. "I could ask you the same," she replied, her tone cool as a winter stream. "Last I checked, you didn't care about education, or me." His jaw tightened, a flicker of something, regret, dancing in his eyes like embers in a dying fire. "You don't know the half of it," he murmured, stepping closer. The air between them crackled, electric and dangerous, and she felt the old ache bloom anew, a bruise pressed too hard. Before she could retort, Margaret appeared, her silver hair glinting like a blade. "Mr. Blake, I see you've met my star employee." Grayson's smile was a predator's grin, all teeth and charm. "We're old friends," he said, his gaze never leaving Lana. Margaret prattled on about the fundraiser, oblivious to the storm brewing, but Lana barely heard her. Her mind spun, a kaleidoscope of questions. Why was he here? What did he want? And why, after all this time, did her pulse race like a rabbit's under his stare? The night wore on, a blur of speeches and applause, but Grayson lingered at the edges of her vision, a dark star pulling her orbit askew. During a quiet moment, he found her again, leaning against a marble column, a glass of scotch in hand. "You look different," he said, his voice low, intimate, as if the crowd didn't exist. "Stronger." "And you look richer," she shot back, but her sarcasm faltered, the words tasting of rust and longing. He chuckled, a sound that rumbled through her bones, and offered her his arm. "Walk with me, please." She hesitated, her fingers twitching as if reaching for a forbidden book. Against her better judgment, she took it, his warmth seeping through her like ink into paper. They stepped onto the balcony. The city sprawled below in a tapestry of lights, the cool night air sharp with the scent of possibility. "I owe you an explanation," he began, his breath misting in the chill. "But it's not what you think." Her heart thudded, a drumbeat of dread and desire. "Then what is it?" she demanded, turning to face him. His eyes searched hers, raw and unguarded, and for a moment she saw the man she'd loved, the one who'd promised her forever before, vanishing into the void. "I had to leave," he said, his voice breaking like glass underfoot. "I didn't want to, but I—" He stopped, his gaze dropping to the city below, as if the truth lay buried in its streets. Before he could finish, a waiter interrupted, calling him back inside for a toast. Grayson hesitated, then pressed a card into her hand, his fingers brushing hers with a jolt that sang through her nerves. "Meet me tomorrow, please. I'll tell you everything." She stared at the card, black embossed with his name in silver. Long after he'd gone, the weight of it heavy as a stone in her. Back in her hotel room, she sat on the edge of the bed, Caleb's latest drawing of a rocket ship clutched in her other. Her son's wide, curious eyes, so like Grayson's, haunted her. She'd kept him a secret, a treasure hidden from the man who'd abandoned. But now, with Grayson's scent still clinging to her skin and his words echoing in her ears, she wondered, could she keep hiding forever? Or would the truth, like a river breaking its banks, sweep them all away? The morning after the gala, Lana stood in her hotel room, the black card with Grayson's silver-embossed name glinting like a shard of obsidian on the dresser. Her fingers hovered over it, trembling as if it might burn her, the air thick with the stale perfume of last night's champagne and the sharp tang of her own indecision. She'd barely slept, her dreams a tangle of cedar-scented whispers, and Grayson's grey eyes, stormy as a nor'easter rolling into Boston Harbor. Caleb's drawing still lay crumpled on the bed, a rocket ship soaring toward a star she couldn't reach. She hadn't called Grayson yet. She wasn't sure she would. But the city had other plans. At noon her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the Met, 2 p.m. I'll be by the Temple of Dender. We need to talk." No signature, but the clipped authority screamed Grayson. Her stomach twisted, a knot of sour dread and molten curiosity. She could ignore it, catch her train back to Boston, and bury this reunion like a fossil in the sediment of her past. Or she could go, face the man who'd once painted her world in hues of espresso and rain, and demand the truth. The clock ticked, each second a hammer against her resolve. She grabbed her coat. The Metropolitan Museum of Art hummed with the murmur of tourists and the faint echo of footsteps on marble, a cathedral of history that smelled of dust and reverence. Lana found Grayson by the ancient Egyptian temple, its sandstone glowing under the skylight like a relic of forgotten promises. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his charcoal suit a stark contrast to the sun-warmed stone, his presence a low hum that vibrated through her chest. "You came," he said, his voice smooth as velvet dragged over gravel. "I shouldn't have," she replied, crossing her arms. The air between them crackled, tasting of ozone and old wounds. "But you said you'd explain. So talk." He stepped closer, his gaze pinning her like a butterfly to a board. "I didn't leave because I wanted to," he began, his breath a faint mist in the cool gallery air. "My family, my father, found out about us. He saw you as a distraction, a threat to the empire he was building. He threatened to ruin you, Lana, your scholarship, your future. I was 22, broke and terrified, so I left. I thought I was saving you." Her laugh was sharp, a blade slicing through the quiet. "Saving me? You gutted me, Grayson. I spent months tasting ash, hearing your voice in every silence. And you think that was mercy?" Her words hung there, heavy as wet wool, and his face crumpled, a rare crack in his billionaire armor. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice low, raw, like a cello bow scraping a frayed string. "I've spent years building walls, firewalls, companies, fortunes, trying to forget the one thing I couldn't protect. You." He reached for her hand, but she pulled back, her skin buzzing where his fingers nearly grazed her. "Don't," she warned, her throat tight with the salt of unshed tears. "You don't get to waltz back in and rewrite the story." But her resolve wavered, the heat of his nearness a flame licking at her edges. She turned away, staring at the temple's reflection in the shallow pool, its stillness mocking the chaos within her. "Lana," he said, stepping behind her, close enough that she felt his breath stir her hair, warm and spiced like a forgotten autumn. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. Not yet. Just a chance to show you I'm not that coward anymore." She spun to face him, her hazel eyes blazing. "And what if I don't want you to? What if I've moved on?" It was a lie, thin as tissue paper, and they both knew it. His lips curved, a ghost of the smirk she'd once adored, and before she could stop him, he closed the distance. His kiss crashed into her like a wave, fierce and unyielding, tasting of scotch and regret. Her hands fisted in his jacket, pulling him closer even as her mind screamed to push him away. The world dissolved. The temple, the museum, the years, until it was just them, a fire reignited in the ashes of what was. When they broke apart, breathless, her lips tingled, a sweet ache that pulsed through her veins. "This doesn't change anything," she whispered, but her voice trembled, a leaf caught in a storm. Grayson's eyes darkened, a promise and a plea woven into their depths. "It changes everything," he countered, his thumb brushing her cheek, rough and tender, a paradox that seared her skin. "You feel it too. You always have." She stepped back, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "I need time," she said, turning toward the exit, her heels clicking a staccato beat on the marble. He didn't follow, but his presence lingered, a shadow stitched into her every step. Back at the hotel, she collapsed onto the bed, the taste of him still on her lips, a bittersweet echo that wouldn't fade. Her phone buzzed again, another text. "Dinner tomorrow, 7 p.m. I'll send a car. Say yes." She stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keys. Caleb's face flashed in her mind, his wide grey eyes, his infectious laugh. Grayson's eyes. Her secret loomed, a thunderhead on the horizon, and she knew. One dinner could unravel it all. Could she risk it? Could she not? The city outside her window glittered, a constellation of possibilities, and she felt the pull of him, magnetic and relentless, drawing her toward a precipice she couldn't yet see. Lana's hotel room felt smaller the next evening, the walls pressing in with the weight of Grayson's invitation, still unanswered on her phone. "Dinner tomorrow, 7 p.m. I'll send a car. Say yes." The words glowed like embers on the screen, daring her to step into the fire. She'd typed no a dozen times, deleted it each time, her fingers trembling with the taste of his kiss still lingering, a smoky sweetness that clung to her like damp earth after a storm. Caleb's voice echoed from a voicemail her neighbor had sent, bright and bubbling. "Mom, I built a rocket with Mrs. Carter. Can we launch it when you're back?" His innocence was a tether, pulling her toward Boston, away from the man who'd once been her gravity. But Grayson's pull was stronger now, a current she couldn't outswim. She typed yes and hit send before she could rethink it. At 6:55, a sleek black car purred outside the hotel, its engine a low growl that vibrated through her chest. The driver, a man with a face carved from stone, opened the door without a word. She slid in, the leather cool against her thighs, the scent of polished wood and Grayson's cologne, cedar and smoke, already curling around her like a lover's whisper. The city blurred past, a smear of neon and shadow until they stopped at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the Hudson. Grayson waited at a table by the edge, the skyline a jagged crown behind him, his silhouette sharp against the twilight's bruise-purple glow. "You look beautiful," he said as she approached, his voice a deep rumble that rolled through her bones. She'd chosen a simple black dress, its fabric soft as a sigh, but under his gaze, it felt like armor peeling away. "Thanks," she muttered, sitting across from him, the clink of her wineglass against the table a brittle note in the air. The meal unfolded in a dance of flavors, seared scallops that melted like butter, wine that stung her tongue with dark cherry and spice. But every bite was overshadowed by the tension coiling between them, a wire stretched taut. "Why now?" she asked finally, setting her fork down with a soft clatter. "After all these years, why chase me down?" Grayson leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his grey eyes catching the candlelight like polished steel. "Because I'm tired of running," he said, his breath warm with the scent of Merlot. "I built an empire to prove I could, but it's hollow without—" He stopped, his jaw clenching as if the words were thorns he couldn't spit out. "Without you." Her heart stuttered, a bird trapped in a cage of ribs, but she forced a laugh, sharp and jagged. "You don't know me anymore, Grayson. I'm not that girl you left." "Then let me know you," he countered, his hand sliding across the table, stopping just short of hers. The space between their fingers buzzed, a live wire sparking with possibility. "I've got a weekend planned, a retreat in the Catskills, for the foundation. Bring Caleb. Let me prove I'm not just words." Her breath caught, the mention of Caleb a cold splash against the heat of the moment. "How do you know about him?" she demanded, her voice tight as a drawn bow. He smiled, a flicker of mischief softening his edges. "Margaret mentioned you're a single mum, said your kid's obsessed with rockets. I figured he'd like the stargazing up there." Relief flooded her, bitter and brief. She hadn't been found out, not yet. "I'll think about it," she said, but the idea took root, a seed cracking open in the dark soil of her mind. The Catskills retreat was a sprawl of rolling hills and pine-scented air. The Foundation's guests a mix of donors and kids from underfunded schools. Caleb bounded ahead, his sneakers crunching gravel, his laughter a melody that tugged at Lana's chest. Grayson met them at the lodge, his usual suit traded for a sweater that hugged his frame, his grin boyish as he knelt to Caleb's level. "You must be the rocket guy," he said, offering a fist bump. Caleb giggled, his small fist meeting Grayson's, and Lana's throat tightened, the sight a brushstroke of pain and wonder. Those eyes, grey as a winter dawn, mirrored each other, a secret she carried like a stone in her pocket. The day blurred into hikes and telescope sessions, Caleb chattering about constellations while Grayson listened, his attention a steady beam that warmed them both. By night, a bonfire crackled, its smoke weaving through the air like a ghost's sigh. Grayson found her at the edge of the circle, a blanket draped over his arm. "Cold?" he asked, wrapping it around her shoulders, his fingers lingering, rough as pine bark against her skin. "A little," she admitted, the fire's heat a dull pulse against her face. They walked to a nearby cabin, the world shrinking to the creak of floorboards and the snap of logs in the hearth. Inside, the air thickened, charged with the scent of burning cedar and the weight of their nearness. He turned to her, his gaze a slow burn, and she didn't pull away this time. His lips found hers, softer than before, a question answered in the press of their bodies. The kiss deepened, a tide pulling them under, and they stumbled to the rug, the firelight painting their skin in golden shadow. After, they lay tangled in the blanket, her head on his chest, his heartbeat a steady drum beneath her ear. "Stay with me," he murmured, his voice a thread of sound in the quiet. "Not just tonight." "For good." She froze, the warmth of him warring with the chill of her secret. Caleb's face flashed, his smile, his trust, and she pulled back, the rug's weave biting into her palms. "I can't," she whispered, standing, her dress a crumpled shield as she fled to the door. Outside, the night air slapped her cheeks, sharp with pine and guilt, and she heard him call her name, a plea swallowed by the wind. Back at the lodge, Caleb slept, his small form curled under a quilt, oblivious to the storm brewing in her. She stared at him, her son, their son, and felt the truth clawing its way up her throat. Grayson was close now, too close, and the weekend wasn't over. Tomorrow loomed, a tightrope stretched over a chasm, and she wondered, could she keep balancing or would the fall claim them all? The Catskills morning dawned crisp, the air biting with the scent of frost-kissed pine and the faint musk of last night's fire. Lana stood on the lodge porch, her coffee steaming in a chipped mug, its heat a fleeting shield against the cold knot in her chest. Caleb's laughter rang from the meadow below, where he chased a soccer ball with other kids, his breath puffing in white bursts. She watched him, her son, their son, his dark hair catching the sun like a raven's wing, and felt the secret she'd cradled for 6 years clawing at her ribs, a beast too long caged. Grayson's voice still echoed from the cabin. "Stay with me. For good." A velvet plea that had unraveled her defenses. She'd run, but the truth was a shadow she couldn't outpace. Grayson emerged from the lodge, his sweater rumpled, his grey eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. He stopped beside her, close enough that she felt the warmth radiating from him, a furnace against the chill. "You left," he said, his voice low, rough as gravel underfoot. No explanation, just gone. She gripped the mug tighter, the ceramic searing her palms. "I needed air," she lied, her words tasting of ash and cowardice. His gaze bore into her, sharp as a blade, and she turned away, focusing on Caleb's small form darting across the grass. The silence stretched, taut as a violin string, until he spoke again. "What are you afraid of, Lana?" "Me. Us." Her laugh was brittle, a shard of glass shattering in the quiet. "You don't get it, do you? It's not that simple." Before he could press, a shout split the air, Caleb's voice, high and panicked. She dropped the mug, coffee splashing like blood on the wood, and ran. Grayson followed, his footsteps a thunderous echo behind her. In the meadow, Caleb sat clutching his knee, a scrape blooming red against his skin, tears streaking his dirt-smudged face. "Mommy, it hurts," he wailed, and she knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she brushed his hair back, the strands soft as a whisper. Grayson crouched too, his presence a steady weight, and pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, pressing it to the wound with a gentleness that twisted something deep in her gut. "You're tough, rocket guy," he said, his tone warm, coaxing a hiccuped laugh from Caleb. "We should get this checked," Grayson added, lifting Caleb with ease, his arms a cradle of strength. Lana nodded, her throat tight, and they piled into his car, the drive to the local clinic a blur of winding roads and the boy's soft sniffles. At the hospital, a nurse cleaned the scrape, but a doctor insisted on a quick blood test, standard procedure for a fall, he said, his voice clipped as a metronome. Lana sat rigid in the waiting room, Grayson beside her, his knee brushing hers with a jolt that sang through her nerves. When the doctor returned, his clipboard rattled like dry leaves and his words fell like stones. "Type AB negative. Rare, but he's fine. Funny thing, Mr. Blake, you're AB negative too, right? Donated here last year." Grayson frowned, nodding slowly. "Yeah. Why?" The doctor shrugged, oblivious to the bomb he'd dropped. "Just a coincidence. Small world." He left, but the air thickened, heavy with the scent of antiseptic and revelation. Lana's pulse roared, a tidal wave crashing in her ears, and she felt Grayson's gaze shift, slow and deliberate, like a predator sensing prey. "Lana," he said, his voice a low growl. "How old is he?" She stood, her chair scraping the linoleum with a screech that clawed at her spine. "6," she whispered, barely audible, but it was enough. His face changed, shock, then fury, then a raw, aching dawning. He rose, towering over her, his breath ragged, tasting of coffee and betrayal. 6 years, he repeated, each word a hammer strike. And those eyes, God, how did I not see it? He grabbed her arm, not hard but firm, pulling her into a quiet corridor. "He's mine, isn't he?" "Caleb's my son." Tears burned her eyes, spilling over, hot and salty against her lips. "Yes," she choked out, the confession a blade slicing through 7 years of silence. "I found out after you left. I tried to tell you, but you were gone. Vanished. I couldn't find you." His hand dropped, his face crumpling like paper in a fist. "Why didn't you try harder? When I came back into your life, why keep this from me?" "Because I was scared," she shouted, her voice echoing off the sterile walls, a banshee's cry. "Scared you'd leave again, scared you'd take him from me. I built a life for us, Grayson. You don't get to just—" "I wouldn't have left if I'd known," he roared back, his fists clenching, the air crackling with his rage. "My family blackmailed me, threatened to destroy you, your dreams, everything. I thought I was protecting you. But this—" He gestured toward the room where Caleb waited, his voice breaking. "I've missed everything. His first steps, his first words. You stole that from me." Her knees buckled and she sank against the wall, the cold tile a shock against her back. "I thought I was protecting him," she whispered, her hands shaking like leaves in a gale. "From you, from your world." He stared at her, his chest heaving, then turned away, pacing the corridor like a caged lion. When he faced her again, his eyes were wet, glinting like shattered glass. "I need time," he said, his voice hoarse, frayed. "But I'm not walking away. Not from him, not from you." He left her there, the sound of his boots fading into the hum of the hospital, and she slid to the floor, sobs racking her, the taste of salt and regret flooding her mouth. Caleb's small hand found hers later, his voice a lifeline. "Mommy, why are you crying?" She pulled him close, his warmth a balm, but her mind spun. Grayson knew. The truth was out, a wildfire she couldn't contain. Back at the retreat, he avoided her, his silhouette a distant shadow by the fire as night fell. She watched him, the man she'd loved, the father of her child, and felt the ground shift beneath her. He'd promised not to walk away, but what did that mean? Would he fight for them or against her? The stars above glittered, cold and unyielding, and she knew the next move was his, and it could break them all. The Catskills retreat faded into a memory of pine and ash as Lana drove back to Boston, the hum of the highway a steady drone beneath Caleb's soft snores in the back seat. Her hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white as bone, the taste of hospital antiseptic still bitter on her tongue. Grayson's last words, "I'm not walking away," rattled in her skull like loose change, a promise or a threat she couldn't decipher. He'd stayed silent after the confrontation, his silhouette a ghost by the fire as she'd packed their bags, his absence a weight heavier than his presence. She glanced at Caleb in the rearview mirror, his small chest rising and falling, his lashes dark against cheeks flushed with sleep. Her secret was ash now, scattered by the wind of truth, and she wondered what storm would rise from its ruins. Days bled into weeks, the crisp October air giving way to November's bite. At the bookstore, Lana stacked shelves with mechanical precision, the rustle of pages a dull hymn against the ache in her chest. Caleb chattered about school, his rocket obsession undimmed, but she caught him staring out windows, his grey eyes, Grayson's eyes, searching for something he couldn't name. She hadn't heard from Grayson, not a call, not a text, and the silence gnawed at her, a hunger she couldn't sate. Had he meant it? Or had the truth driven him back to his glittering empire, too broken to face the life he'd missed? Then, one grey afternoon, the bell above the bookstore door jangled, a sharp note that pierced the quiet. She looked up, and there he was. Grayson, framed in the doorway, his overcoat dusted with rain, his presence a thunderclap in the muted space. Customers glanced, then drifted away, sensing the electricity crackling around him. He carried a wooden box, its edges worn smooth, and set it on the counter with a thud that echoed in her bones. "I've been busy," he said, his voice low, steady as a river carving stone. "Not running, building." She crossed her arms, the scent of wet wool and his cedar cologne curling around her like a vine. "Building what?" she asked, her tone cool, but her pulse betrayed her, a frantic tattoo against her ribs. He opened the box, revealing a model rocket, sleek, painted in Caleb's favorite blue, its fins sharp as a hawk's wings. "This, for starters," he said, a flicker of a smile softening his jaw. "And something bigger. I shut down the cybersecurity wing of Blake Enterprises. Too many ghosts in those servers. I'm starting a foundation for single mothers for kids like Caleb, to give them what I couldn't." Her breath caught, a shard of ice melting in her throat. "Why?" she whispered, her hands itching to touch the rocket, to trace the proof of his words. "Because I lost you once," he said, stepping closer, his gaze locking with hers, deep and unyielding as a winter sea. "And I lost him before I even knew him. I won't lose you again." His voice broke, a crack in the granite, and she felt it, a tremor of hope, warm as sunlight through frost. Before she could respond, Caleb burst from the back room, his sneakers squeaking on the hardwood. "Mom, can we—" "Oh!" He froze, eyes wide as they landed on Grayson, then the rocket. "Is that for me?" Grayson knelt, his grin boyish, unguarded. "If your mom says yes," he replied, handing it over. Caleb clutched it, whooping, and ran to show the cashier, leaving them in a pocket of stillness. Lana watched, her heart swelling, a tide rising against the walls she'd built. "I'm not asking you to forget," Grayson said, rising, his hand brushing hers, rough and warm, a spark that sang through her veins. "Just to let me try. To be here, for both of you." She swallowed, the air thick with the scent of old books and new beginnings. "It's not that easy," she said, but her voice softened, a thread unraveling. "You hurt me. You missed so much." "I know," he murmured, his thumb tracing her knuckles, a tender scrape that grounded her. "But I'm here now, and I'll keep showing up every day until you believe it." Weeks turned to months, and he did. He came to the bookstore with coffee that steamed like a promise, helped Caleb launch rockets in the park, their laughter a melody weaving through the bare trees. He rented a brownstone nearby, its windows glowing gold against the snow, and filled it with blueprints for the foundation and toys for Caleb. Lana watched him rebuild, not just a life, but a bridge between them, plank by plank, his actions a language louder than words. On Caleb's 7th birthday, the bookstore buzzed with balloons and the sugary tang of cake. Grayson arrived late, his arms full, a telescope, a gift bag, and something small glinting in his palm. The party swirled around them, but he pulled her aside, near the poetry section where the air hummed with quiet magic. "I've got one more present," he said, his breath warm against her ear, spiced with mint and nerves. He opened his hand, a ring, Simple silver with a single sapphire, blue as Caleb's rocket. "Lana," he began, his voice a low hymn, "I've wasted years chasing shadows. Let's not waste another day. Be my partner in everything. Marry me." Her heart stopped, then surged, a wave crashing against a shore she'd thought eroded. The room faded, the chatter a distant tide, and she saw Caleb watching, his grin wide, unknowing but trusting. She looked at Grayson, his eyes grey as dawn, pleading, steady, and felt the past loosen its grip, a knot untying in her chest. "Yes," she said, the word a breath, a leap, tasting of frost and freedom. He slipped the ring on, his fingers trembling, and kissed her, soft and sure, the world tilting into place. Caleb cheered, oblivious to the weight of the moment, and the party spun on, a constellation of laughter and light. Outside snow fell, blanketing Boston in silence, but inside they were warm, a family forged from broken pieces. The future stretched before them, uncharted as a starfield, and Lana knew, this time it was forever. What did you think of the story? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to get our stories firsthand. And don't miss the emotional story that's now appearing on your screen.